Harley Schlanger here. And Harley, some dramatic things happening and about to happen. Let's go through the top news stories.
Well, the first thing that just happened today is that a 3-judge panel, which was hearing the government's appeal of the restraining order issued by a lower court against Obama's executive orders on immigration. In other words, it was a lower court which put a restraining order on implementing his policy because of constitutional questions. The Obama administration appealed it, and the higher court, the appeals court, upheld the lower court, in other words, saying that they will not allow Obama's policy to go through, sending it back to the lower court to go beyond a TRO, a temporary restraining order, just to outlaw it or reject it. Now, the court ruling was that the Obama administration argument was very weak and did not breach constitutional standards. Now,
right.
One of my friends quipped, well, what do you expect from a constitutional law professor who hasn't read the Constitution and disagrees with it? Right. So this was another big setback for Obama, and it comes in the wake of a whole series of these, including growing opposition within the Democratic Party, as you and I were discussing last week.
Right.
A collapse of the so-called policy, the policy in the Middle East, which even Ash Carter, the defense secretary, said, well, it doesn't look like we're doing that well. And at the same time, the second set of documents released by the Defense Intelligence Agency, last week we talked on the program about the Benghazi release, where they showed that not just Hillary Clinton, but Susan Rice and Obama and others knew that it was al-Qaeda that attacked the embassy in Benghazi. The second part of that filing said that the policy of the United States was to make arms available to al-Qaeda-linked forces in Syria, preferring al-Qaeda to Assad. And so now we have a smoking gun. It's not just your supposition or my hypothesis. The Defense Intelligence Agency has put out a report saying this was U.S. policy. So where are the Republicans who can come out and impeach Obama? They're too busy getting their panties in a bunch about Hillary Clinton. Hillary's not going to be president. She's not going to make it. The Democrats are not going to nominate her. No. Go after Obama, who has another year and a half to destroy this country.
In fact, here's the situation. When I watch the news, Fox News, and it's the last time I watch a Fox News show regularly, was O'Reilly with Dana Perino trying to attack Rand Paul. Now, Rand Paul's not perfect, but he's the better candidate, and we need good candidates on the Democratic side, because then we'll have a real election, not a selection, which I call where they basically shove in our face disgusting candidates that still want to continue the same policy, whether they call themselves Republicans or Democrats. They're continuing the same overlord policy that's going to destroy the country, destroy sovereignty. For example, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Transatlantic Partnership, these agreements, there's dissension even in the Democratic Party.
Well,
and we have Mitch McConnell trying to shove it through.
Party.
Yeah, we have Mitch McConnell trying to shove it through with a big grin on all the other things like the Patriot Act he wants to shove through. And they're attacking Rand Paul because he calls the Patriot Act unconstitutional when it's right on its face completely. The metadata collection is completely unconstitutional.
Well, I saw last night Megyn Kelly interviewing Rand Paul, defending the collection of data and saying that it really doesn't defy the Constitution.
I couldn't believe it. Well, I don't like watching Megyn Kelly. She's nuts. She's got
well,
she
cut him off when he was trying to answer it.
I know that. And what's disturbing to me is Megyn Kelly is what I call a disgusting info babe. She's what I call an info whore that's basically out there trying to say that my opinion is more than yours, and she's popping her eyes at Rand Paul, who's trying to maintain some civility during the whole discussion while she cuts him off. It's disgusting.
Well, and see, this is the problem with Fox, is that Fox is part of the Wall Street control of the Republican Party. Right. And their line is that we need more troops in the Middle East. We need tougher policies against Putin and Russia. We need free trade. We need tax cuts for the wealthy. And we need to cut any function of government except protecting the rich.
Well,
and
if we would collaborate with Russia,
this is what's caused the problem we have, and the Democrats offer no alternative.
Well, the fact is, 1,000+ new fighters every week come from the former Chechen Republic and other Russian satellites from the former Soviet Union. And if we allied ourselves with Russia to get rid of the extreme Islam element and not support and drop equipment and materials to the ISIS inside their own occupied territory, including now Palmyra, we would clean it up with the Russians' aid, and we'd stop this mess before it would become a regional war that could go nuclear and literally bring the great powers to their knees with a nucler conflict. And now, the problem is that we won't do that. We're not doing that. It's ridiculous.
Here's the other impeachable offense that has to do with the Middle East, is that we saw in the case of Libya, where Obama was supposed, since, the War Powers Act, which was sort of an update on the constitutional provision that only the Congress has the power to declare war. The War Powers Act gives a slight window to the president, which says that if we're attacked or American interests are under attack, you have up to 60 days to file for an authorization to use military force. Now, first of all, in Libya, we were not attacked by Libya. Not at all. Our interests weren't attacked. But we went to war there. And after 60 days, many Democrats went to the president and said, you have to come to us for an authorization to use military force. And at that time, it was John Kerry, who was a senator, and John McCain, who put down the rebellion in the Senate and said, this is the right war, it's a good war, give Obama the freedom to fight. Now look what's happened to Libya. It's a staging ground for Al-Qaeda on North Africa, a couple of hours boat ride from Italy. Now, then you remember the same issue came up. What about if we bomb ISIS, if we fight ISIS, if we're sending in troops? And at first it was we're going to send in 25 advisors, then 300, then 925. So we have over 1,200 troops that are acknowledged in Iraq right now. We're bombing every day. Obama said he would go for an authorization to use military force. The Congress tried to draft it, and they couldn't get it through. So there's no authorization for us to continue the futile efforts we're making against ISIS, because for every time we bomb a few of their leaders and a few of their troops, more join and they take bigger territory. So these are impeachable offenses, and yet Republicans are more concerned about whether Hillary Clinton hid something in an email than they are about what's happening right in front of their noses when they're sitting in the Congress. It is disgusting.
They're trying to slide to the next election thinking they'll do. And by the way, they want to put a lot of these policies like reauthorization of the Patriot Act while they have a Democratic president, so they don't have the stink on them of doing policies like Obamacare, which should have been fixed several years ago rather than the disaster it is now, which is eating away and destroying medicine and the medical establishment, trauma units, surgeons, doctors, hospitals going bankrupt. What's happening is they didn't control the costs of drugs or equipment. They didn't allow tax breaks to occur properly for equipment when people purchase it on their own health savings account. And it's going to be catastrophic. More and more people are losing insurance because the employers will not pay for full-time employees to have insurance. So a lot of people in their middle and elderly employees of many years are getting fired, and then people are ending up with part-time work with no benefits. It's disgusting.
Well, we're seeing the economy crater in many, many ways, and maybe the next
doing it every way. I mean, it's like
what's happening with Greece, but no one's fighting it.
Let's go through some of these articles. LaRouche history will be made this week and next. What's he referring to? Because he's been around 90-plus years now. He knows that something terrible is going on. And there's opportunities, too, in the terror, like that ancient Chinese symbol, opportunity and disaster on the same symbol, depending on which side you look at it. The opportunity of building a new economy that will allow real trade, that will not make us lose our sovereignty on the one hand, and increase workers, proper working conditions in China and Malaysia and elsewhere, but also protect American workers and patents, which we don't have any protection for when we deal with the Chinese and Indians, etc. So
we can pick it up on the other side of the break.
Yeah, on the other side, we need to get into this stuff, because between now and September, I think, things are really going to start rocking and rolling. It's going to get very, very incredible. We talked on the break about the Greek situation. I can hear the creaking sound of the European economy and the European Union literally ready to fall down like a building ready to be demolished. Tell us what's going on.
Well, you had asked before the break about Lynn's assessment that the next 2 weeks are going to be historic. And what he's referring to is the fact that you have between now and the middle of July a whole series of events, some of which are crucial for what's going to happen. One is there's a G7 meeting coming up shortly in Dresden. And the G7 is going to go there and try and figure out how do they stop the BRICS. Remember, they kicked the Russians out, so it's no longer the G8. The Russians, it's sort of like throwing someone off a ship that's sinking. The Russians are celebrating as they're leaving. So there's the G7 meeting where they're going to try and figure out what to do about Greece. Now, in June, there are 5 payments due by Greece, 4 to the IMF and 1 to the European Central Bank. By the end of June, they're supposed to come up with $2.996 billion. Now, they're saying for the June 5th payment, which is $307 million, they probably have enough to pay the pension and wages and the IMF. So all of a sudden, Europe is breathing a sigh of relief, saying, see, Greece is not going to break. They're going to stick with us. Well, they've never said they're not going to pay because they don't want to pay. They don't have the money to pay, and they're not going to accept further conditions to borrow more money. You know, it's like if you owe a certain amount on your mortgage and you can't pay it, and they say, okay, well, we're going to knock half of your house down and charge more money. Why would you accept that? You'd probably just leave.
Well, you pointed out something really relevant a few months ago. You mentioned that 90% of the money that was loaned to Greece was corruption loans. Literally, the money went
96%.
Yeah, it went back to the big banks and to the banks in Spain, France, Britain, etc. So these banks in Germany, primarily, these banks basically ran off like banksters, like gangster banksters, and they basically said, "Hey, you owe more money, so we'll make another deal. Only this time, we're going to make you owe even more money to get a tiny pittance, and then you still won't have enough money to pay off the interest. So we're going to crush you." And the Greeks just basically are at the point now where even if they wanted to, they couldn't pay it. It's just
and the line is that the reason Greece is in trouble is that everyone in Greece is a tax dodger. And it's just not true.
No.
The tax dodgers are the multi-billionaires who live in London and Switzerland, and there are some ship owners and others who, like the rich in this country, don't pay much in taxes. But the real problem in Greece is that their economy, as they shut down industry under the International Monetary Fund conditions and European Union conditions, the only money they had coming in was agriculture and tourism. And when Europe went into a recession, the tourism fell, and with the sanctions against Russia, Greek agricultural products fell, and also, again, the internal European market, people started buying less Greek products. So then you add to that conditionalities, cutting government spending on health care, maintenance of infrastructure, roads, and so on. And the Greek economy shrank 25% because they listened to the so-called Troika, which is the European Union, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. Now, Dr. Deagle, if someone came to you for medical advice, and your medical advice knocked 25% of their life off, you know, they died 25% earlier because of your advice, would the next patient be wise to go to you?
No. In fact, unfortunately, that is the situation now in medicine, where the profit motive, including making sure you don't deal with the underlying cause of the condition. Even a good example is the use of the HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors that actually cause diabetes and heart failure. And we know that it's published, so there's lawyers that are also MDs that are actually suing them. But in the financial side, they almost get a pass. The transnational corporations aren't paying any tax. The small and medium businesses are getting taxed to death, 40%
and they're allowed
tax
to continue to add to their patent time so that you can't get cheaper generic products. It's a complete ripoff. So to go back to the Greece example, they owe $2.996 billion by the end of June. Now, they're barely, if they can, Varoufakis, their finance minister, said he thinks they have enough to cover the $307 million owed by June 5th. Now, what happens on June 12th, June 16th, and June 19th when they have the other 4 payments? They're not going to have it. And so this situation threatens $260 billion, euros, of foreign exchange derivatives. because the foreign exchange derivatives are based on the idea that the euro will maintain a certain price stability, and therefore people won't dump them. Now, who's going to start dumping them?
Right.
Not the normal investor. It's going to be dumped by the big banks. They're going to go short to get their money out and stick their customers with this $260 billion blowout, which will then start eventually hitting the banks.
Right. Well, they'll do bail-in then.
What goes into
they'll bail in to
then?
actually cover their debt. So they'll, and this I call this is the Euro Jenga game. Means when they start pulling out these sticks, they'll start saying, well, all you people, all your investment money, all your pension funds that are leveraged into derivatives, basically it's all ours. You're an unsecured investor. It's gone. And people are going to be in a state of shock. It'll be like I talked to my grandfather, who was around in 1929 when the crash hit. And people were like jumping out of windows in a state of shock where they literally had a heart attack within hours
now you can't do
afterwards.
it because the high-rises all have windows that you can't jump out of.
There you go. You have to actually. You can jump off the roof, though. You can get up to the roof. And jump.
And some of the leading bankers are doing that. But Bill, here's the other point: once this thing starts to unravel, the question is, how much can governments pay? And the governments don't want to pay. How much can they steal from depositors? That's what the bail-in policy is. And once they get through with bailouts and bail-ins and they can't cover it, what's going to happen? The banks are there'll be hyperinflation. The banks will write down their debts, and we'll be stuck with nothing. Savings gone, jobs gone, businesses gone, and the banks will still be functioning. They'll still be standing.
This is my grandfather told me is that we're across America in 1929 there were roughly 50,000 small little mom and pop banks like hardware stores, and the big banks decided they were going to start pulling in their credit tickets because they were leveraged against the Fed Reserve credit system, which had been set up.
And the smaller banks were more solvent than the bigger banks. They had actual cash.
When they pulled in their credit and they made them insolvent, the small banks basically said they had to close their ticket windows so people couldn't withdraw their money because they would kill them. And this is what caused the crash in 1929. And we could see it coming. For example, the Japanese started pulling money out of the international system because they had to repair their country after a big earthquake a year before the 1929 crash. There were lots of financial reasons why they could see this coming, and this is why they later set up in 1933 the Glass-Steagall Act. The problem is that they don't see this again, and they know the disaster is coming, and there is an alternative now. For example, if I was Greek, I would say this to you Greeks out there: why don't you go and get credit from the BRICS nations and the new international bank and just tell the Europeans we're not paying any more debt?
And that's what we need to talk about in the next segment.
Yeah, we're not paying it. We're done with you. We don't want euros anymore. But I think that you're right on, and so is Lyndon. We're at the edge now. If we don't remove Obama, I do call the Obamanectomy. We need to prepare the OR. The schedule's ready. 9 a.m. By the way, this is before The Rock and the San Andreas, which comes out at the end of the month, and some idiots are out there trying to prophesy or predict somehow from God knows what they're doing that there's going to be a big earthquake tomorrow. Look, you fools out there, there's technology for getting rid of earthquakes, and they're creating microquakes. There's a technology in the economy that Lyndon's talked about for 4 or 5 decades plus that could fix the world economy and get away from this leveraged debt monster that's about to consume us. And like you said before the break, Carly, we don't have a lot of time left. This is not years away. This is months. And I think between now and the fall, if this isn't fixed, and we don't just fix the Greek issue, and when I hear idiots saying that Greece, it's their fault why the situation's happening, this is, again, avoiding the whole issue that transnational corporations like General Electric and Bechtel Corporation, many others, don't pay a tap of taxes. They contribute $2 billion to the Obama Fund because of these PACs. At the same time, they don't pay a tap of taxes, and the average man is being taxed to death, the average small and medium business. People can't get credit for an invention out of their garage to start something and get a real new innovative technology going. So we have a horrendous situation here where if this does collapse, which will be probably considerably worse than 1929, everything that Lyndon has said, unfortunately, will come true. That we will literally have a collapsed economy and civil unrest like they've never seen it. If the government thinks they can enforce martial law on a starving, hungry, and angry population with 94 million armed Americans, they're fools. And Obama's a fool.
But their view is that that's why you have the militarization of police departments. That's why you have...
Won't mean a thing. Let me tell you what will happen, and this is something, I got to say this now and interrupt you. I can tell you that 99% of the police, and I talk to Marines because I live here in Marine Town, I call Vista, Oceanside, California, I trained with the Marines up there at the Marine, shooting range, okay? And I know these guys firsthand. 100% of the Marines in the military will stand behind us. Only a few of these so-called SEALs and other people that are kind of psychopaths will otherwise, and they're a teeny-weeny minority. The government cannot enforce martial law. They should get a life and realize things like I call terror porn that they're putting out, like Jade Helm, and people that make a big deal out of it. It's no big deal. In fact, we should just ignore it. If we ignore it and we just legally clamp down and say, no, you can't do that in our state, you can't do that kind of action in our state. It's a violation of common decency to try to pretend you're going to grab citizens because they're, quote, patriots. So, to me, the whole idea is that Obama is a fool, and his masters are a fool in Britain and the banks over in the, quote, the city of London. They're running it, I call Londonistan, really. And if we don't stop this, and the Russians and us, we have the same problem. We got extreme Islam in Chechnya, etc. Why do you think all the bombs are going off in Moscow? It's the same idiots. They warned us about the Zanarov brothers, which we are watching to make sure, yeah, these guys are terrorists. Oh, yeah, for years. And Russians tell us after they come back from Chechnya, we don't do a damn thing about it. Now they're saying they're going to go and kill this kid. And we know darn well that he wasn't carrying a pressure cooker bomb. We know he wasn't, because we have photographic evidence of it, but it doesn't matter. They continue to manage these guys like the FBI manages terrorists, like 3 years ago at the Christmas lighting ceremony.
Don't you think it's kind of ironic that to supposedly deter a movement that sends out suicide bombers, we think they will deter them in the future by executing one? I mean, that's so absurd.
Well, in fact, it does the opposite. It does the opposite. I'll tell you what does.
It recruits them, yeah.
It recruits them. I'll tell you what would work to fix this problem. Number one, stop dropping supplies. Stop doing business with nations like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the Arab Emirates that actually wouldn't want to directly finance. Stop us supporting them and the state of It's a Real Hell, Israel, training them, including Mr. Baghdadi, who's actually a false actor in there. Stop trying to play both sides of this issue, which we're doing, both sides of the war, and stop pretending that ISIS is this big monster you couldn't stop. We could send in Delta Force, which they put over 150 requests, just Delta Force, and they could clean out the rat's nest, and in a matter of days, then the normal military could take control of the place. It's ridiculous. Even the Iraqi army, which outnumbers the ISIS people, are running, and then cities like Palmyra are falling. What I see happening is they're trying to chew away. Eventually they'll get to the point where Syria will have to pull out its big bad weapons with Russian and Iranian help, and it's going to get really vicious. And that can happen by the fall. I really see all hell breaking loose if we don't stop this fool in the White House who is marching us over like lemmings over a cliff.
Well, the way to stop the fool in the White House is to stop being a lemming. And This is what we've got to do.
Good idea.
The American people are marching over a cliff, which is exactly what the oligarchy wants. They want fewer people. This is about reduction of the population. And, anyone who doesn't believe that has not read the publicly available documents that go back to the founding of Planned Parenthood, of the World Wildlife Fund, these kinds of organizations that were set up supposedly to protect nature, except for human beings, as though we're not part of nature. Man is the crown of creation. Right. We are there. The mandate for man is to subdue the earth and to have dominion over the earth. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't mean you destroy the earth like a strip mining company. It means you develop it for the sake of mankind. Those people who say that man is the great destroyer don't realize that animal species always have died off. They're dying off at a slower rate now because we protect them, as opposed to what happens under ice ages or meteor hits or things of that sort. It's up to man. This is one of the things Lyndon LaRouche has really pointed to as a fundamental advance in science is the Russian biogeochemist named Vladimir Vernadsky. And Vernadsky was most prominent in the pre-Bolshevik period in the first part of the 20th century, even though he lived until the 1940s. But what he wrote about is the interrelatedness of the three phase spaces of existence. The non-living, namely rocks, most of the universe is non-living. The living, the biosphere, which is ranging from one cell amoeba to the most complex non-human forms of life, including plant life, and then human life. Now, each of these have internal growth dynamics, but the only one that can self-consciously improve its conditions is mankind. With the living, or the so-called biosphere, they improve their conditions through evolution over time. And so you see some animals die off and other animals survive. This is how the oxygen was created by very primitive chloroform development and so on. But mankind can control that. Mankind can use it, which animals can't do.
Right. In other words, a good example you mentioned is Nawapa, which is, and please continue on that, because it's a perfect example that Lyndon has been talking about for 5 decades, and it was planned under John F. Kennedy until he was assassinated. We should have had Nawapa done, which would have saved the drought in Texas and the southwestern states decades ago. Instead, no, we have a disaster.
And the worst part of it is that you have phony frauds, people who are completely illegitimate, called scientists, who argue that man is causing the change in the climate, when it's absolutely clear to anyone who's ever studied these things that we have a minimal effect on the overall atmosphere and biosphere, which is largely changed by changes in electromagnetic activity, solar activity, and galactic activity. And our job as human beings is to figure out where we fit in this process and how we can use it to benefit human life, as opposed to saying that, well, in order to save the planet, we have to kill off 2/3 or 3/4 or 4/5 of the human race, which is what Jerry Brown, the absolute genocidal fool who's the governor of California, is saying, that California can't sustain more than 300 to 500,000 people.
Yeah, he is. He's got some kind of brain-consuming, slow disease like Kuru or Jakob-Creutzfeldt disease. There's something wrong with his soul too. It's very, very wrong.
If he's so green, let's get rid of him because we can't afford the water for him.
Yeah, right.
Actually, his name is appropriate. It's Brown.
The guy that sent the message?
Yeah.
Yeah, Brown. Yeah, everything will be brown.
Yeah.
I think we're back on the air now. I heard the bumper coming in, but it was really low. Harley, I guess you got an email message from somebody who was praising the leanest, greenest governor, which is Jerry Brown. I guess
leanest,
his term is appropriate, as you said.
Greenest. Yeah.
Leanest, meanest, greenest. Yeah, well,
the mean part is true. And he might actually be lean, but he is really not green. He's brown, as in brown shirt, because what he's proposing would make Hitler blush. He's talking about a state with 37 to 38 million people that should only, according to him, have a total of 300,000 to 500,000 people. So,
does that sound like somebody that's a Nazi totalitarian freak, control freak, where on one hand they got Prop 65, which they haven't struck down, which means if there's even 1 part per million lead in your veggies, and everywhere you go in here in California, you get these darn warnings. You go into health food stores with organic food that has not been sprayed with glyphosate, and yet they have a lead warning and say may cause birth defects and other crap. At the same time, they're force vaccinating. Now idiots like him are talking about desalination plants, which they're building in Carlsbad, the largest one in the world outside Saudi Arabia. They should be bringing Nawapa down, and they should also look into the fact that there's climate modification occurring that's causing catastrophe. There's a blocking high out in the North Pacific Ocean. And instead of his solution is just like idiots out there, we'll just take out the grass, we'll cut down our water bill. No. If the drought continues, and luckily we're having rain this last month every 2 or 3 days a week, we could be at the end of it because we're heading into a moderate cooling period. But these people, even if they have a temporary stay in it, they need a permanent solution, which is North American Water and Power Project that also generate hydro, and change the Southwest, good for plants, animals, and humans and industry. But if they don't fix the problem and the drought continues here, you'll see people leaving California and Southwest like crazy, and it'll be we're the economic engine that makes 90% of the food in America comes 6 months of the year from California, and 57% of the high technology in this entire country comes from California. 57%.
Well, think of the irony. that in the last depression, the Great Depression of the 30s, because of the destruction of agriculture, you had the Dust Bowl, and you had groups from Iowa, Kansas, but especially the Okies from Oklahoma, who came out west to California. Now, California was pretty dry, but they had begun the major water projects that had started to bring the water down from the ice pack, the snowpack, and from the
Sierra
various, And so what you had is that there was foresight. There was something called thinking for the future. And this was expanded then under the FDR period with the Hoover Dam, but then especially under Pat Brown, Jerry Brown's father. Pat Brown basically said, we don't give a damn about snail darters. We believe in people. And we're going to move earth and water for the sake of developing the land and giving people an opportunity. And so from the Great Depression to the 1990s, California was a growth engine for the whole country. Productivity. As you mentioned, it was a manufacturing center. The second arsenal of democracy behind Detroit that helped us win World War II was the Los Angeles aerospace and auto sector. Right. Now, here we are since the end of the 80s, the post-Cold War period. California's two great industries are Hollywood and Silicon Valley. And, the base of the state in advanced agriculture, advanced industry, the California education system, which, as Pat Brown said, we want to attract jobs not because of cheap labor, but because of skilled, educated labor. This is being reversed. And so where are these people going to go now that they'll be able to experience what their grandparents and great-grandparents did in the building of California? The whole country under Obama is going into a deep depression. So either we get rid of Obama and go back to Glass-Steagall banking regulation and then a credit policy which puts credit through the private banking system into the hands of people who will create real jobs in manufacturing, construction, areas of science and research, or else we're not going to have a country left. And Obama is just making the situation worse by his policy of war, of confronting China, of confronting Russia. We haven't talked about that much today, but just last week, the U.S. was buzzing Chinese installations on the islands in the South China Sea. And the Chinese were frantically saying, back off, this is our airspace. And the U.S. is saying, well, you can't claim that as your airspace. What would happen if Chinese warplanes started hanging around Catalina Island?
Yeah. Well, the fact is that if America can't defend its so-called policy like this, with not only reason but also the idea that what resources are there.
Collaboration. We need the Chinese and they need us. We don't need to go to war with them.
Well, in fact, if they don't have customers, which is us, and to be honest, they have had $200 billion of industrial espionage because their culture basically suppresses their own innovation in their country. They have tried to replicate even their space program.
It really is changing. I think I've talked to a bunch of engineers who just got back from China who were impressed with the changes over 10, 15 years ago, because you're describing what existed in China 10 to 15 years ago.
Oh, yeah, it's changing. It'll take another 10 or 20 years for them to not feel terrified with the totalitarian regime that if you innovate, you die, which is basically what would happen back 20, 30 years ago.
And President Xi is very different. And what you see, what's interesting, the Chinese said that the idea of President Xi Jinping is win-win. And he said, what Confucius says is that if you want friends, help them develop. And this is the Chinese policy now. This is why...
Yeah, this is a change, though, because in the past it was we win, you lose kind of attitude.
Oh, it is a change. The communists were ruthless and brutal, but Premier Li, the Prime Minister of China, was just in Chile and Peru and Brazil, and he signed $75 billion worth of deals, including a proposal to help them build a bioceanic tunnel that would go from Brazil on the Pacific coast I'm sorry, from Peru on the Pacific coast to Brazil on the Atlantic coast.
Right.
And this was greeted in South America with great cheers and excitement. And Washington said, no, you can't do that. They've been trying to do this for 2 centuries.
No, why would
and
they
finally,
not? Why would they not want it to happen? What's in for America's?
Well, for the same reason that the United States is opposed to the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the same reason we're opposed to pipelines that would go through Greece and Austria to provide Russian oil and gas to Europe, the same reason that we're shutting down industry in the United States. They hate the idea of man in the image of God. We're dealing with people who are essentially Satanists. That's what the oligarchy, the financial elite are. And they despise the idea that science and technology are there to be developed for the benefit of all the people. They don't like that.
Yeah, one of the most important statements in the Bible, in the Old Testament, talking about the future of man, it says, now they are in one place and of one tongue, nothing shall be restrained from their imagination. Now, if their imagination is bad or evil, it'll be terrible and destructive. But if man has a proper perspective, like you mentioned with Lyndon about energy flux density, a world where all the nations, all the colors, all the peoples have strong independent nations that collaborate to bring together their minds, their creativity, their intelligence to protect the planet from space weather and near space objects and fluctuations in climate and ice ages, etc. We can create a world where we don't consume oxygen to create energy. We don't have anybody hungry. We have no need for war.
And we can say to all the children of the world, your life is important for all of humanity because of the potential that you have.
Right.
Instead of the idea that it's a great tragedy that nations are overpopulated. There's no such thing as overpopulation. There's underdevelopment. And we're on the side of promoting underdevelopment because of bastards like Obama and the Bush family.
Not only that, once we populate enough of our planet, we should terraform Mars, which is a perfect place to terraform, set up its own magnetosphere to protect it from the incoming space, weather, etc., from the sun. We can literally spread across the galaxies with life extension, with the singularity of intelligence and our control of our own genetic future. There's no reason for man, created in the image of God, needs to suffer under fools like Obama and these bankers.
Yep.
It's a bright future if we want to take it. It's a very bright future. But right now is a time of testing. If we don't change really soon, we're entering into a time of darkness, like, as they say, the darkness that falls on Mordor and the trilogy of the Ring. It's coming quickly.
See you next week.
Take care.